Hey everyone, welcome to MetaMagic, the RPG podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the tabletop RPG Shadowrun and all its future goodness. I'm your host, Brandon, and let's go ahead and get started.
Please listen carefully.
Welcome. So, I'm going to go through a lot of books this week. I actually made a pretty large purchase this month of probably about like $300 or so in books that I'm still going over. I usually try and read those at work when I'm able to. I haven't really been able to just because it's been so busy. I did kind of want to cover. I picked up some Mutants and Mastermind and the Fate system, which are some things I actually did want to cover this week, but because I didn't really get a chance to, we're going to talk about one of my favorite books instead, Shadowrun. What is Shadowrun? Shadowrun is going to be a mixture of cyberpunk and fantasy. Cyberpunk's gonna relate to like being in the future. You're gonna have computers hacking, like just all kinds of future tech. You'll have cell phones. You'll have things like implants. You'll have like eye implants, arm implants, things like that. That's gonna refer to the cyberpunk aspect of it, as well as you do have different races. You're gonna have your humans, orcs, elves, things like that. So let's go ahead and kind of break this book down today. The best place to start would be with the setting. Is going to be the easiest way to kind of wrap your head around how this game works. Shadowrun takes place in an alternate timeline to our modern day Earth. Around the early, I want to say 2000s, magic suddenly returned to like a modern day Earth. And so at the time we had cell phones, we had cars, we had all of our modern conveniences, and then magic comes back. And what that does is it ends up morphing a lot of the humans into other, like, I guess they call it like their original races, because there was magic in the past. That's where like fairy tales and things like that come from. So it starts morphing them into like their original races that they started out as. So a lot of people stayed human. Some people turned into trolls, dwarves, elves. Because of that, everyone kind of branches off into tribes. But and this has greatly affected the world in terms of not just landscape, but the way the countries divide up. One of the first things that happened when magic returned was like the Native Americans got their magic back first, and they used like a big ritual to erupt a volcano like in the United States and start basically getting their own country back. It caused a few other countries and nations to split, so the map is kind of in disarray. It looks different from our modern day map. The thing about Shadowrun, that all happened in the early 2000s in the Shadowrun kind of lore. This game actually takes place in the 2070s, so 2000, the year around 2072, is I believe the latest they've gotten to. The book that they have now is actually the fifth edition of Shadowrun. The previous edition actually did take place in previous years in the canon, but fifth I think is going to be the best one to play and start with. A lot of people did like fourth, but I'll get to some reasons why fifth is kind of better in terms of like setting. So you have all these. It's 2072. Society has still advanced, and you've had these races around for quite a while. So since then, everyone's kind of grouped off as they normally would. The other half of it, the cyberpunk half, is that corporations have taken over every aspect of your life. They own everything. the like local police enforcement and things for the actual governments themselves are usually either non-existent or very, very, very small. What happens now is governments like award contracts to security companies, and whoever gets it for like that, that contract for the next couple years becomes the police for that area. So you'll have companies who are the police departments. You have companies that run everything. Um, you have VR, so virtual reality, and you also have like augmented AR reality, which they refer to as hot and cold simming. People can get implants to replace their full arms. They can replace their spinal columns with like fiber optic cables so that it transmits their reactions at the speed of light instead of at the speed of electricity. You can there's magic, and we'll kind of get into the different kinds of magic that there are. But there's more than one kind, unlike Dungeons and Dragons. Well, in Dungeons and Dragons, there's usually like two. There's light and dark magic. I guess would be the most basic way to break that down. Maybe psionics if you're feeling bold, but no. In Shadowrun, there's multiple kinds of magic. That's kind of the setting that you're playing. So this futuristic fantasy race, lots of people very like heavily divided just on whether they use magic, what race they are. A lot of tension, a lot of like criminal behavior, and so what you're it's a really dark future. I guess is what I mean by criminal behavior. It's really dark future. You basically you're either work for a corporation or you are more or less the enemy. Where you come in, you play a Shadowrunner, and what Shadowrunners are they are hired people that work for corporations anonymously to, in most cases, it's like steal corporate data, but it's different forms of basically like corporate sabotage for the most part. And that usually is like armed and dangerous combat, like breaking into another corporation and stealing their MacGuffin, for lack of a better term, stealing their data, blowing up a competitor's business, helping escort, like human trafficking, things like that. Basically, anything you can get a job doing, you are usually hired by a corporation anonymously to do it. That's what a Shadowrunner is. You are not a good guy. You're not a bad guy. You're both. You can be either. There's no sort of alignment system. You kind of just do whatever jobs you do, and your reward, you have two different kinds of rewards, either with money or with like increasing your skill, and that's usually going to be balanced out between whether you're more good, or more evil, or cause less damage or more damage to how messy you make the mission, things like that. So if you're looking to get into Shadowrun, the only thing you're going to need is the core rulebook to start. That should have everything you need to start playing. There are very similar to Pathfinder. There's a lot of books for it, and each book is basically a shopping manual, because that is, I would say, half the game of Shadowrun is buying all these gadgets and implants and magical weapons and things like that. Every session, because you're like a mercenary, that's what you do in your downtime. You buy stuff. You buy new toys. You buy the shiny new toys. The core rulebook does have the shiny new toys. It will teach you how to DM, and it will teach you how to play the game. The first couple downsides of Shadowrun, I will say it is probably one of the most fun tabletop games. It's definitely up there in one of my favorites. And you will, I promise, if you play it, you will have fun, period. I can promise you Shadowrun is awesome. I've never had a person who does not like playing Shadowrun. Even I know I have some people who don't really like tabletops, don't really like role playing. They love Shadowrun. It's great. You can role play however you want. It's not as strict. It's not even strict. It's not strict at all. You can play however you want. You can play silly. You can play hardcore, and it all works. Everything's done in a one shot, so you can do it in one campaign session. It's great. It's fun. It's wacky. It can be wacky. You can keep it straight laced also. But it's got some problems. If you can push past these, it's definitely worth it. The character creation in this game is god awful. It is the worst character creation I think I've ever seen in a tabletop game ever. It's confusing. You pick from, to my understanding of it, different. You pick different categories to start. So you pick like money. You do an A, B, C, D, E. This is just for the basic. There are a couple different ways you can do it, but the easiest way is just do A, B, C, D, E, like money, skills, attributes, and what that is you pick from A to E how many points you want in each category, and then you have to go out and spend those points. You end up spending like 20 or 25 points on just skills, and the list of skills is double Pathfinder's. I would say it's really, really long, and character creation, doing it just on paper is a nightmare at best, and it takes hours. It takes hours. It could take you like, I mean, if you if you really look into it and are trying hard, which my players did when I did this to introduce this to a new group before, I think they spent like half a week, like 6 hours total, like making their characters for Shadowrun, it's awful. It's terrible for an RPG. Secondly, the book is probably one of the I don't know if that's fair. Maybe not the worst written book, but it's not written very well at all. The rules for it are not well defined in a lot of parts of the book. The rules for there's 3 forms of combat, and that's going to be actual combat, like any other game, actually punching like someone in the face. You have magical combat, where you can actually fight in the astral plane in combat, and these are all going on at the same time. And then finally, the last one is matrix combat, which is like hacking, because you actively do all of this in one combat at the same time. The thing is, I know just for the matrix combat, I can say, there's another book called Data Trails that fully fleshes out how matrix combat should work, because in the core rulebook, it only lightly outlines it. Like I said, it's enough to play. But they didn't come out with that book for like 5 years after the first one came out. So, like, it was awful. It's the worst written book. One of the worst written books I've ever seen. As far as from like a major production company. But I love it. So here's why you should actually... So getting the negatives out of the way first. If you can overcome those 2 things. If you can read through those books, if you can get through the core rule book and kind of grasp it, which that's kind of asking a lot, but if you need to reach out to me on Facebook, Twitter, I am more than happy to go over this book with anybody, because it's written so poorly. You can private message me and I will help you play Shadowrun, because it's that fun. And secondly is just getting over the character creation. Character creation, I have a solution for you. The best way to do it is sit your players down at a computer, laptop, whatever. There's a program that can help you with the character creation called Chummer. It's Chummer 5 for 5th edition. You can just start a new character through there, and it goes through the step-by-step process of making the character for you, lets you pick out all the skills. You still will need the book to reference like all the abilities and how everything works, in terms of like you have to pick like positive and negative qualities for your character and balance those out, and there are literally hundreds of them, and not even being sarcastic or over-exaggerating. There are over hundreds. There are probably at least 300 or 400 different qualities you can pick. That application really cuts down and really helps out like what you want to pick for your character. Chummer 5, I can put if you like, I can put a link. If we get enough requests for it, I'll put a link for it up on the website so you can download it from there. But otherwise, this is how Shadowrun works. You create your character, and you don't have classes, but you have something called archetypes. Character creation is open-ended, so you can add whatever stats you'd like wherever. You can be magic and melee. You basically just put points into attributes, and that's how you make the character. whatever your character ends up being best at the end of creation is how your character is defined. If your character is really good at like melee and you use cybernetics like no magic, you're considered a street samurai. If you use magic, you're usually considered like a mage or like a street shaman, depending on your type of magic you use. And then there's also something called adept. So I'm going to kind of bust into those a little bit deeper here. Aside from going into the nitty gritty archetypes, the main things you're going to be picking are going to be, do you want to be a like cybernetically enhanced fighter, or do you want to be magic or internet magic? Those are kind of your choices. Usually you either go cybernetics or magic. Having both is a problem in Shadowrun, but you're equally as strong, so there's no downside. They do have something called an adept, which uses physical magic. Think of the abilities to basically run straight up a wall and kind of like stick to it using magic. Being able to zoom in with just your eyes using magic. That's an adept, and that's what I mean when I say like physical magic. We're gonna refer to that as an adept. You do have your traditional mages as well, who can cast lightning and shoot microwaves from their fingertips to like melt your skin, things like that. Shoot fireballs. You can also summon spirits as a mage, which you can like latch onto people or have them fight in the astral plane. Finally, then they have matrix combat, and that's going to be for your hackers. That's actually what I played when I played Shadowrun. I played a technomancer who uses there's two kinds of hackers as well. Just with everything. There's two kinds. There's either the I use magic or I don't use magic version of everything. So with the hacker, you can either be a technomancer who hacks using basically internet magic is the best way to define that. It lets you bend the rules of the game a little bit to work to your advantage. You can shut off other people's like computers and uninstall their operating systems without their permission, which is something like a regular hacker can't do. But then you have your regular hackers who are called deckers. So regular hackers are just called deckers. They use basically like a tablet, and they can hack into things a lot better and faster than technomancers can, and wreak a lot more havoc in terms of doing damage, because you can actually knock people out who are connected to the matrix by basically doing damage directly to their mind when they're plugged in, because everything exists in AR or VR in Shadowrun. Augmented reality or virtual reality, depending on what you're using. And usually everybody uses some form of that, because people will link in their guns to their head so they can like see what their gun sees through their eyes and just get better accuracy and things like that. So the final class that is on there is kind of outside of the rest. It's usually referred to as a face. Basically, you can do body modifications to be like the Bard class, where you can talk to people and lie to people and change your face and your voice using like technology normally. You can also do it using magic, but you'll end up you'll be about 50-50 when you put your foot into that pool. You'll be either an adept face or like a street samurai face. You normally don't go one, just go face. Usually you have to have some kind of combat on the side, which is why it is another archetype and another class, I guess, as you kind of define it. It's kind of got its feet in two pools at once. So, but again, all these can kind of be changed around and can be manipulated to your will. What I've defined is just kind of the generic terms people use to define archetypes as best as they can. And that's like when you're talking about them online or you're talking about them just in general with your DM. These are by no means what you're bound to. You can be an adept who has a metal arm. You can be a hacker who is good at being like a face also. It just depends on where you put your points. So that's up to you. The game works by you have a lot of skills you have to pick. Not just like what you can do in terms of like how good you are with a gun or how good you are at driving a car. You do have to pick those, but you also have qualities that are like define your character background, and you usually have to have positive and negative ones of those, and those increase your how good you are at something. And then you also have your gadgets, which can increase how good you are at something. If I put a scope on my gun, I get a +2 when shooting far away. So you can do all kinds of gadget customization. So When you go to actually do an action, you add kind of all three of those together. You do your quality if it applies. You add your actual skill with something. You also add your one I forgot as well as your attribute because you have strength, dex, charisma, all that good stuff still there. So you're gonna add that, and then you're gonna add whatever your gear adds as well. And by add, I mean this game works around rolling regular six-sided dice, but you're going to add them all together and roll them all at the same time. So you'll end up rolling 15, 16 six-sided dice. Anything that's a 5 or a 6 is considered a success. Anything lower than that doesn't count as anything. And then you have to check your successes versus whatever you're doing or whoever you're fighting. So it does require, make sure if you go to play this game, you will need one of those little things they sell. Most game shops sell them. You can buy them online of just D6 dice, usually for like Warhammer. Buy like 2 of those. Those little D6 dice. I think it comes with, let me see, like 40 dice. Yeah, buy 2. You're going to need 2 for Shadowrun. So that's how the game works. You just rolling 6-sided dice and doing versus checks. Adding, subtracting 2-sided dice depending on the situation. There are rules for like cover and all the good stuff you'd expect to find any other RPG with shooting, or with any kind of combat. Because I'm sorry, I say shooting, but you can definitely use swords in there as well, and they're just as effective. Crossbows. And the imagination is your limit with Shadowrun, because the way it kind of works is they have basic equipment like guns and things like that. I mean, they have all kinds of guns, all kinds of cars, but they give you the option to add anything to anything using like an attachment like type modification. So if I want a car that has a hidden compartment with like a motorcycle in it, I can do that. Like the rules support for it, or I can put like a minigun that pops out of the side. I'm going to have to, in-game pass some checks to make sure I can get that, like, off the black market and make sure I have enough money for it and all that good stuff. But it can be done, especially at character creation. If you have a lot of money, there's some pretty crazy stuff you can do. Things like skin pockets where you can conceal weapons. You can wear, like, outfits that block internet, like a Faraday cage outfit, which blocks internet signals so you can't be hacked. Your cell phone, you'll have to buy ones of different ratings, which means that it's harder to hack the better cell phone you have, and that's important so people can't get into like your text messages. So if you take a job, no one can see what you're doing, or get into like your equipment, even like your gun that you're firing, maybe can lock the trigger just by getting it hacked. There's everything. You can put anything on everything, and there are enough books, especially if you're looking through the Chummer, it's all there. So, I mean, like I said, you'll still need a lot of the books for reference, and that's why I say they're all shopping books. The other half of the game is shopping. When you complete a mission, you're gonna get money, and you're gonna get like something called karma, which you use to increase your anything that's not buyable. So any kind of stat, you can remove negative qualities. You can add positive like qualities to your background. You can take off skills, add skills, and it all gets redeemed for karma. So you either get karma or nuyen, which is the money, and that the money is used for shopping. And the entire game works in one-shot campaigns. Mostly, I mean, you can do overarching. The way the book describes the best way to write it is to make everything a one-shot, but make some of those like 2 or 3 of the one-shots. Let's say if you do five one-shots, make 2 or 3 of them tie into a larger story. But all in all, every session should be one mission that you start and finish. So, I mean, you can do it the other way, but I mean, there are no hard rules for any of this. I mean, it's just, arguably you could do that in any game, like with 5th edition, but the way that it's meant to be played is in kind of like 1 or even like 2 session short stories, because you're just mercenaries doing a job, and that's how you level up. You level up from finishing jobs. So if you're doing one giant long mission job, you're gonna kind of screw over your characters if you're DMing. So you need to write Short stories I like better because I think it's easier to think of just a short mission with a beginning, middle, end, get the MacGuffin, get out of there, than to do a whole overarching story, which is why I tend to run from like books when I'm running like D&D and Pathfinder, just for something to go from 1 to 18 in Pathfinder, to write yourself. It's long. It's really long, and it's gonna have a lot of hooks, and you got to build up these characters. Whereas in Shadowrun, you can just do them as one shot and still build up those characters, but you don't have to feature them every time. You don't have to be going after the same big bad every single time. I do like that it does take the stress off of players of like an alignment system, which a lot of players who play this really like not having any kind of alignment. You don't have to. You're essentially an anti-hero at all times. And, everyone wants to play the bad guy at least once, I think, in a game. You see a lot of people who will run around and play either, like, chaotic neutral or, like, try and sneak in a chaotic evil, which, I mean, I don't allow for when I play just because it kind of messes up the story. But that's in, like, Pathfinder and D&D. But Shadowrun, by all means, be a bad person. As long as you don't mess up your teammates, which you're hired to get along with, it's not a problem. But I like the idea that corporations kind of rule everything. The game has kind of an eerie parallel to like our current like climate. Considering this game is actually really old. Like the original edition was made back in like the not too long after Dungeons and Dragons. I want to say like the 80s is when Shadowrun was originally made. It was definitely around one of the like the first tabletop games that was out. Or at least one of like the beginning like classic like older RPGs was Shadowrun. The older editions were kind of funny because they didn't have the concept of Wi-Fi either, which 5th edition has Wi-Fi. It actually just came out with it when this book came out, which is probably like 2000 and taking a look at the book here. 2013 was when the 5th edition came out, but the edition before that was written, I think, early 2000s. They didn't really have, like, the concept of Wi-Fi for most things, so everything had to be plugged in. So you'd have to plug in your gun, and you had to plug in your phone to your body and stuff like that, and it was kind of just, like, all these wires everywhere in your characters, which is really fun, especially when it's based in the future. But in 5th edition, it's all wireless. Everything can be hacked wirelessly now, which is why I was saying earlier, that's why I recommend 5th edition over 4th, because it's got the rules for wireless. Otherwise, it's kind of weird. Like, I think it's kind of weird running around with like plugging wires and like having to manually, when you hack something, you have to manually like plug your thing into it. You had to actually take your like, it's like an aux cable in Shadowrun. You take your aux cable and like plug it into the machine, and then like start hacking it from this. You gotta physically go inside the location. Now you can just get a van and park it outside when you're playing and hack from there. But unfortunately with it, it's not open source, so there aren't a lot of resources in terms of like if you want to try it before you play it. You pretty much have to go out and buy the core rulebook off of like Amazon or from, I believe it's Catalyst. Yeah, it's Catalyst who makes Shadowrun. But if you're someone who likes RPGs or maybe is tired of like playing 5th edition or wants something more cyberpunk themed or has a lot of experience with Pathfinder or something like that, want to branch out a little bit, start with Shadowrun. It's a good place to start in terms of branching out off the original. I wouldn't start with this game, which is why I did not recommend it for my episode 1, which is kind of recommends the best games to start with in terms of getting into the hobby. But if you're looking to branch out, Shadowrun's great. You should be able to find it in most places if you're going to physical shops. It's pretty popular and it definitely shows why. Even though it's written so poorly, the gameplay itself makes up for it, just because the setting and those one-shot missions and being kind of the anti-hero is so fun and not something you get to do in a lot of games. A lot of games you have to be the goody two-shoes good guy, or at least team up with them, which it gets old after a while. So it's good to kind of be like, you can still be the hero without being a good guy in Shadowrun, and I think it's really great for new players. That's kind of all I have to say, I think, on Shadowrun. If you have any other questions, or like I said, if you want to learn how to play this game, the core rulebook is sloppy. Unfortunately, and I'm sorry, Catalyst. I apologize. I love your game, but make if you could remake that core rulebook, oh man. But yeah, if you guys have any questions, I know there's a subreddit for Shadowrun, where I've actually turned for a lot of my questions when I have a lot of rules questions for it. But if you guys want to send anything to me via Facebook, Twitter, email, I can definitely answer those. But that should be it for this show. I think I'm kind of exhausted what I can talk about in general with Shadowrun. Go ahead and check us out on iTunes, Stitcher, Play Music. We're up there too. We do have things on SoundCloud. Just if you want to go ahead and share us or give us a rating on there, preferably 5 stars, that'd be great. Anything kind of get the word out there. And of course, feel free to reach out to me on @CastMetaMagic on Twitter, @MetaMagic Podcast on Facebook. And then, of course, any other questions you may have can go to metamagicpodcast@gmail.com. And as always, thanks for listening.